Hello and welcome. I'm very excited to share with you my experience with the Entra private access, and I also try to test the Kerberos SSO while using the private access, leveraging the global secure access client. I find it very interesting and fascinating. I hope you guys will find it interesting as well. As always, my videos are first about the technical details, architecture, the reasoning that why one should use or one should not use the product, as well as a live demo that explains things very clearly and lucidly. Having said that, Microsoft has invested heavily in a zero trust network access, and as all of us know, zero trust is a big buzzword in cybersecurity area these days. So I think it will resonate with your organization, your CIOs, your CEOs, that this product that we are going to address today is related to your zero trust security principles and fundamentals. Having said that, when we move forward, just give you a brief insight what we're going to discuss today. Obviously, we're going to look into Microsoft Zero Trust Network Access Architecture. We're going to look into the simplified private access architecture. We're going to try to do a brief comparison of Zero Trust network access with other third-party providers. Some of them are the leaders in the industry, and position where Microsoft Zero Trust Network Access stands today. Then we'll also go into the requirements to deploy the solution in your organization, and then we will go to a real demo. So that's the big picture that we're trying to address in this presentation. Hope you would find it interesting and you would like it. As always, please provide your valuable feedback, comments, questions, uh, as we always do. With that, let's just move into a very high level architecture of the zero trust network access. So, as all of us know, the three fundamental pillars of zero trust are verify explicitly, least privilege access, and assume breaches, right? This is where the whole zero trust foundation, zero trust architecture relies to. Microsoft incorporates these three fundamental principles into Microsoft Entra Private Access. And once you see the demo, you would see how effectively this Microsoft Entra Private Access addresses all the three pillars of zero trust, right? Now, obviously, Microsoft has a Microsoft Security Services Edge solution. Microsoft has a huge network, which is Microsoft Global Private Wide Area Network spread across the globe. So that means the solution is scalable to your geopolitical requirements, right? So it's not just confined to one location, and you can extend the benefit of this services to your users in any part of the world, which makes it very impressive without any additional tremendous efforts, right? Without thinking about putting load balancer, additional infrastructure. I'll explain to you once we get into the demo that how simple it could be, right? And then you will evaluate for yourself that does that really make sense when we talk about a large distributed network of your organization. Now, from the architecture perspective, it is pretty straightforward but very interesting at the same time. And why I say that why it is so interesting and something very unique in my viewpoint, that the Microsoft Zero Trust Network Access is, you will see down on another slide, is a very identity-centric network access solution. And I emphasize on the word identity-centric. The reason being that this particular offering or feature brings two different pillars of security together, which is very interesting to see. So instead of managing two very different separate pillars of security, which is network access and identity access management separately into two separate areas, this product brings them together very effectively, very smartly, and not only in terms of combining them together, but the overall product that you see out of it is very interesting and very attractive, right? Hopefully, once we go down this presentation, I would be able to establish that fact more strongly. Now, The interesting part here in Microsoft Zero Trust Network Access that it could be any user and any device. I would use caution here when I say any user and any device. This is a newer offering from Microsoft compared to other legends and in this field which who have been there for many years. This product is maturing, is still being built, is still being developed. So Microsoft footprint is invested very heavily, as I mentioned earlier. So some of the services that when I see, so say any user, any device are still in flux. They are being created. They are in the preview mode, which we'll talk down the road, right? So I am being very cautious of what we say here. Any user, any device has got something that you need to know down the road. Well, whether any identities, endpoints, and remote networks, very simplified here, it's creating a dedicated tunnel. So the differentiator here is when you use a regular VPN, you have one tunnel that is your VPN tunnel that provides access to multiple applications here. Now in this scenario, each type of resource you could have an independent dedicated tunnel. And that is a very unique differentiator in my viewpoint because now you have much more granular control to access, right? Which is excessive, which is again talking about the least privilege access. So you don't want everybody to have access to everybody. You can control at a different layer, but why would I allow my network even to be accessible for the resources that the users should not have any privileges to? And that addresses one of the core component of zero trust, right? And then which also we provide here that in addition to that, you are verifying explicitly that who gets access from where, right? This is important. So you're addressing the second big pillar of zero trust, and you will see when I say that and explain you in the demo that when I say verify explicitly and who and how and from where you allow access to your resources. And again, the resources could be in your corporate network, or resources could be if you are leveraging the multi-cloud network architecture MCNA, could be sitting in any other cloud, which could be in Azure, GCP, or AWS, right? Makes it very interesting. Now, as I said earlier, that it this particular offering combines both network and identity together, primarily a identity-centric network access solution, if I'm allowed to say that. That means it brings an additional services, the whole Microsoft identity ecosystem behind the network access. Very interesting. So that means many of you who are very familiar with Microsoft Identity Access Management solution, especially with Entra ID, Entra Conditional Access Policies, right? Behind that, you have the roles, responsibilities, groups, machine learning, continuous access evaluation, robust auditing, monitoring capability that all automatically comes together, right? And that's what I was talking about, that this is a very different perspective when you're looking into using this product, because especially with Microsoft ecosystem, this blends excellently, and that's why Microsoft is investing very heavily here. So you have addressed two core issues for the zero trust, or two core pillars. One is the least privilege access, second is verify explicitly, and third is assume breaches. Your additional controls that you have available through Microsoft Entra and also helps you to continuously keep monitoring and addressing the third pillar of your zero trust, which is assuming breach, right? And as I said, it's just not the words, it's not the just a PowerPoint that I'm trying to present here. I'm trying to make a point here that all the three robust pillars of zero trust are being addressed by Microsoft Zero Trust Network Access solution. And you would also see in this presentation down the road that the best part here, it is very simple to deploy. It looks complex when you look at the big pictures here, the schematics here, but realistically when you deploy it, it's pretty straightforward. And in terms of your network configuration on-prem or on your network is also very minimal, right? So you can say very minimalistic in terms of your network requirements to be changed. So what it means is that in order precisely if your app proxy connector, which is the core component of this architecture of private access, which we're going to discuss next slide, is allowed access, outbound access to Microsoft Azure on HTTP, HTTPS, that's pretty much what you need. So you don't need to change a lot of firewall rules, complexity, change the network, all that is gone. So not only we'll see it in the next few slides, I just don't want to just discuss everything here. You will see when we talk about next slides that how does it score over other third party, zero trust network solutions, right? Now, once we talk about that, let's look at the Microsoft Entra private access architecture first, right? Very, very simple. Basically, you see there your client, GSA client or Global Secure Access client is deployed on your endpoints, whether it's a Windows 10, Windows 11, Android, or iOS or Mac, which we'll discuss the limitations there at this point is installed from there, and that's pretty much it. Once it is installed and configured, it's going to talk to Microsoft Entra private access, right, where you have published your applications. An application will go in more details once we get into the demo, but these enterprise applications are the one where you are allowing access to your different resources. Pretty much you can call them, this is your tunneling endpoint, right? Basically you have 5, 10, 50, 20, 100 servers that you need to expose to your remote users. Those enterprise applications starts kicking in here. Each of them has got his own tunnel. You control security, you control more granular access to that particular resource type, whether that's a file share, whether there's an RDP, whether that's a website, or whether there is a SAP application or any other TCP application. So that is where this is going to shine, and it's going to provide you more granular control, right? And Entra Private Access is connected to your app proxy connector, which is deployed in your environment, in your network, especially on-prem network. App proxy connector is the one that connects back to your other resources, whether I already mentioned the resource type, which could be any of those listed here, which we already talked about. And there could all be like Active Directory joined as well. And that's where a Kerberos single sign-on comes into picture, right? And very interesting to know and very interesting to see once we discuss that portion and demo you that how does the Kerberos single sign-on works through Microsoft Entra Private Access. And especially when I mentioned earlier that the traffic requirement here is, and which we'll discuss in the requirement section as well, is that app proxy connector should be able to connect to basically Azure and HTTP and HTTPS. So you don't have to make tons of changes in your firewall. You don't have to make a lot of changes from your end user perspective. We'll see that, right? So precisely what we are addressing here is that it is a identity centric access control solution, and as I mentioned more specifically, identity centric network access solution for your remote users. Now, because it is identity centric and identity being used here is from Entra, there is a tight integration with conditional access policy that allows you to support MFA, tons of other controls that you know that conditional access policy bring it forward for you to improve the overall security posture of your organization. Governance, auditing, monitoring, compliance, devices compliant, devices you have a specific location that you allow the traffic from, a set of users that would have an application access to, right? Those are the granular controls that we are talking about, and seeing is believing. When I show you the demo, then you would realize what I say here is just not a saying, right? I'll walk you to look into all those complexity and figure it out that whether it makes sense or does not make sense into, right? And as I mentioned, it has got a deep integration with Entra because Entra is a core identity platform here. Not only, this is where I think it is impressive, not only it deals with Entra, but it also deals with your on-prem Active Directory with Kerberos single sign-on. So some of the things that you have never been able to conceive and deliver on your on-prem solutions from the security realm perspective are now possible, right? For example, in past, right, when you have a RDP session, or RDP server created there. Now you need to figure it out that how do I secure my RDP servers, knowing fully how vulnerable they could be, right? So now most organizations would go and think about in a multi-factor solution for RDP, or maybe use the Radius server or NPS server, link it to the Entra ID, and then provide a multi-factor authentication, adding complexity, adding more overheads on your organization, or use third-party products like Citrix or Netscaler or Access Point, etc. Right? Same thing is with HTTP. Now you have a control because you can control the users. So as I mentioned, you can control who can access these applications. In a flat network where you have a flat VPN, you don't have that flexibility. Now you can say, hey, my RDP XYZ RDP server could only be accessed by this group of people. Period. That is one control that you get it. By the way, I'm going to also put a control here that all these users, when they try to do the RDP without doing anything extra, without putting any additional infrastructure, would be required to do an MFA. Wow. Now, I also say that, hey, in order to get to my RDP server, your devices needs to be compliant. I control that. I control the session timeout, right? So all the inherent features of conditional access policy, which were impossible to get on your on-premise resources, are now available at your fingertips. Imagine how effective it is, and especially when you're looking from a lenses of a security architect or a security person, you would realize what I'm saying is that how impressive this product can be to improve the overall security posture of your organization. And believe me, I'm not a Microsoft salesperson here, neither am I a Microsoft FTE. I'm just telling you the facts. It's up to you to accept it or analyze it or say it makes sense or it doesn't make sense, right? I leave it to you guys, but to me, it looks pretty promising when I look from my security lenses, and it definitely helps me and my organization to improve my security posture significantly with a very minimalistic effort. I emphasize again on a very minimalistic effort, right? I'll go over that once we go into the demo. Now, any solution is not a practical solution if it's not cost effective, right? When we talk about cost of the solution, you would find surprisingly many of the organizations who have already been using Microsoft 365 E5 licenses, they don't have to do anything. It's already included and bundled in your license. So there's no extra subscription cost if you're using Microsoft 365 E5. Supposedly you are not using Microsoft 365 E5 licenses, so you can buy Microsoft Entra Suite licenses, which is about $12 per month. Now, when you compare this solution with other solution, third-party solution, with your existing VPN solution, believe me, and I would emphasize that VPN is a flat VPN solution, right? With all the infrastructure behind it, including requirement for MFA, compliance, governance, high availability, operational costs, management costs. Now you think about what we are talking about, right? So in my viewpoint, cost is also a good factor to think about why you could think of deciding to go in the direction of using Microsoft Entra Private Access, right? So even the other products that you have available in the market, which are some of the leaders here in this world, I think I'm not fully aware of their licensing model, but I think they are more expensive than $12 a month, even if you have to buy a new subscription for Entra Private Access, right? So precisely one of the things that we have to be very careful, and I forgot to mention, which I think is core, that what is the actual benefit to your user community, right? From my perspective, you definitely have a much enhanced and improved, better end user experience. Why do I say that? Because it all works under the umbrella. Users doesn't have to know anything about it. Unlike your regular VPN solution where user have to either launch a VPN, then probably get an RSA token, or make sure that you have a PKI running behind it and you have a certificate in place. User has nothing to worry about it. This is all being taken care by the global security access client. You don't have to launch it, you don't have to shut it down, you don't have to worry about authenticating. It is working behind the scene transparently. So from end user perspective, irrespective which part of the world they are sitting, which location they are sitting, as long as they have the internet connection, they don't feel any difference in accessing their required resources that they generally used to access in when they are on premises, right? Barring the fact that now we have more control. So some of the things that you were probably accessing on-prem with lesser of security controls, you might not be able to do it now because that's per design, that's per the architecture, that's per our security and compliance requirements, right? So that's where I'm talking about. Look at this product, look at the offering that it brings, and I mentioned about the simplicity in deployment is also very important to note. How complex this solution is, how many engineers you would need to deploy this solution for your organization is equally important, which you will see pretty much very easy to do that, right? So we'll go over that when we go down into the demo. Now, I have put a small comparison that Microsoft has provided between Microsoft Zero Trust Network Access and Zscaler, who is the leader in this field. I am not going to read everything for you. I don't want to waste your time. This is for you. You can go ahead and read it, or I can give you the link for Microsoft that shows you this table. But what comes out of this is one key factor that I have been trying to highlight since the very beginning of my presentation, that the tight integration with Microsoft ecosystem of your network access is the core distinguisher here in my viewpoint. Cost we have already talked about. Simplicity we have talked about. The user experience we have talked about. But one thing that comes out immediately that you look into, that since it is an identity centric network access solution that combines with the Microsoft ecosystem, that is what outshines this product compared to other solutions in the market, right? So I leave it to you to read through, and then we will go into the next section, which is the requirement, right? As I mentioned earlier, from the licensing requirements perspective, Microsoft 365 E5, if you already have it, you don't have to worry about it. Microsoft Entra Suite, which costs $12 a month. Now, in order to configure the private access, you would need a global administrator, right? That's one time you need it. Once you configure this correctly, then for a day-to-day operation perspective, you probably would need to change your conditional access policies. So you would need somebody who has a conditional access administrator in case you want to modify some of your conditional access policy aligned with the solution, right? Very, very logical here. Similarly, because these conditional access policies are being applied to these enterprise applications created, as I mentioned earlier, then you probably need an application administrator to modify anything on application administrator. Basically, what I'm saying here is you created an application for an RDP to one of your jump server on your organization. Now that application is controlled. You need to define who can access that jump server. That's on application setting where you will say, hey, this application is accessible to these set of users or these set of groups. That's where the application administrator comes into picture. Intune administrator, right? So when you deploy, especially in a larger remote access solution where users are distributed across the world, and we would come into the requirement for the workstation too, you would have to distribute the global security access client and deploy it. How would you do that? Intune is one of your vehicle to deliver your GSA client to your remote users, right? That's where Intune administrator may be required in your organization. Or if you are deploying on-prem machines, then you would probably need some rights to deploy GSA, even if you are installing locally on the machine. So, or you're deploying it to other delivery vehicles like SCCM or whatever, right? So that's where the requirement is from the configuration and operation privileges are. Then we talk about the global secure access client, right? So the key requirement for Windows machines here, it should be Windows 10 or Windows 11, which should be Entra joined or hybrid joined. Keep in mind that Entra register devices are not supported with private access. So it has to be Entra or Azure Active Directory joined devices, which we'll see in the lab too. It is also supported and in GA for Android phones or tablets which are 10.0 or higher. Android Go is not supported. And as I mentioned that Microsoft is heavily invested in the future proofing perspective into this technology, and they are working on for delivering and releasing the iOS Global Secure Access Client. It is in the preview right now. It's not GA. As I said, the product is maturing, right? This proves the point that I mentioned earlier. iOS 15.0 or higher, and it will also support iPads too. The Mac is also in the preview, and any version 13.0 or higher, it would work. Device has to be registered on Microsoft Entra with company portal, and Microsoft Enterprise SSO plugin needs to be installed on the Mac server, Mac machines, right? Now, the app proxy, which is an important element in your entire architecture of private access, you need to have TLS 1.20 TLS 1.2 enabled, and on top of it, any operating system higher than Windows 2012 R2 would work. It can also be installed on Windows 10 and Windows 11. Now, when we talk about connectivity of this app proxy, which I addressed earlier, the connectivity is to Azure via HTTP or HTTPS on port 443 and 80. Straightforward, which I believe in most organizations it should already be there. So you don't have to do any additional work in terms of configuring the private access. We should avoid inline inspection on outbound TLS communication because it could give you an unwanted results. And for high availability, it is recommended to have two connectors per region, right? And this is where I was talking about the global approach, right? Or geopolitical reasons. So you can have two connectors deployed in each region, right? Let's say you have an EMEA location, you have an US locations, you have got locations in Asia Pacific, right? You can always have these connectors deployed, very straightforward to do. You can create the connector groups for each region, and you can publish your applications around it, right? So that's where it is highly scalable, highly available across the globe, which without worrying about additional load balancers, geo load, geo DNS, all that goes away. All complexity is gone away just by doing and deploying these app proxy connectors in the required regions. And from high availability perspective, it's no brainer that you deploy two in each region, right? That's where the requirement comes into picture. Now, before we jump into an actual demo, I want to explain you how I have configured my lab. So from the lab perspective, obviously we are connecting from outside to our on-prem resources, right? Corporate network here. So what I have tried to emulate here is two separate boxes here. One is the on-prem. Pretty much that's a hypervisor server running in my environment, very old server, apologies, which is AR Win12R, which is a Hyper-V, which is in a work group, right? And I have got all my VMs running on top of it, which configures the corporate network here, pretty much, corporate environment pretty much here. I have also, you will see here, I have also created a site-to-site VPN from this server, and it is not a requirement for private access. Why I have done it is that I wanted to show you that devices which are really connecting from outside, which has no connection to your on-prem local area network, are able to access the resources effectively. So in order to join this Windows 11 machine in Azure to this domain, I had to have this site-to-site VPN created so that it is connected, it is hybrid, and I disconnect this site-to-site VPN, and then we can see the results in our demo. So that's the core reason here, right? So as I clearly mentioned, this is not a requirement. Site-to-site VPN or express route is not a requirement for private access solution, because primarily once you connect to the app proxy connector server is already connected to your internal network. You don't have to do anything, right? Now, continuing in further here, I have a domain here, Active Directory domain, to show you Kerberos SSO, which is WFIS Priv. Then we have a domain controller obviously here, which is this guy here. And I have created a file server here, which is going to be important in seeing how do we access the files over private access. And it is also running a web server. So we can show you that how does the integrated authentication works, the Kerberos authentication works from within the private access perspective. And needless to mention that we have one proxy server here, which is the app proxy server here, this one, which is serving two purposes here, app proxy plus Entra Connect as well, right? So it's able to sync the devices as well as the users and groups to Entra. Pretty straightforward, right? Now coming into the Azure environment, I already mentioned about the VPN here. We have this resource group which you really don't need to worry about. This has nothing to do with the private access. This is to host this particular Windows 11 machine. So what you will see here that I have a Windows 11 and I have a Windows 10 here. So both kind of operating system, we will be able to demonstrate you how it works. One is completely disconnected to your on corporate network. One is already in your corporate network, right? And then we have the Microsoft Entra ID. The custom domain name that I have for this particular Entra ID instance is the tool.info. And you will see this is where we were talking about, right? About the enterprise applications. I have 4 applications here. We'll go in more details once we get into the actual demo. But one of the application is the quick WFIS, which allows us for DNS connectivity, right? So now my GSA client can connect to my resources with the host name pretty much, and that is what this quick WFIS would do. That I'll show you the configuration, pretty straightforward, so you don't have to worry about, oh, how I'm going to make the DNS work, right? Or what do I have to change on-prem to make my DNS work for my private access solution. It's very simple to do that. So I have got in another application which is RDP to DC, right, which is doing the RDP to DC. The reason I did that now you can see a granular control that who and how you can access the domain controllers without having any additional layer, any additional infrastructure, any other product. You have a control right here. Then I have got another application which is a file server application which allows you to connect to this guy both from the SMB perspective, from the file server perspective, as well as from port 80 web server perspective, as well as the Kerberos SSO you will see here. And then I have published the entire Active Directory for Kerberos SSO, which is the another application. So you will see I have MFA configured here, but I have not configured MFA because this is purely allowing me to connect my Active Directory and publish my Active Directory for Kerberos SSO. Right? That's pretty much as I have in my lab. And I think now we are ready to get into the real interesting side besides the theory, right? Let's talk to walk scenario here and let's get into the lab. So I'll be back with you in few minutes. All right, ready to see the simplified deployment configuration of Entra Private Access? Here we are. So this is the lab that we discussed earlier through our Visio diagram. This is the hypervisor that we discussed, which is Windows Server 2012 R2. Right here, old server, but still helping me. Now, if you see here, we have disabled we are going to disconnect the site-to-site VPN, which is still running here, but just for the sake of this lab, we are going to disconnect it to make sure that this is not required for the private access solution. Okay, so this is disconnected now. Now, as far as the lab is concerned, rest of the thing that we have here is a domain controller, which you saw in the Visio. This is the OU that is being synced through Entra Connect, which is devices, groups, and users. Not going to go in all details. These machines are all hybrid joined, right? Then we have got the app proxy server here, which is this guy. We have a file server, which is running the file server as well as the IIS server here. So we'll quickly look into the IIS part of it and see how we have configured it. It's a very simple IIS deployment, nothing's fancy. So just quick here. So this is the web server, the IIS server, very straightforward. Sites, default sites, and if you look at the default site authentication here, that is configured anonymous authentication disabled and Windows authentication enabled here, right? So that's where the Kerberos authentication comes into picture. All right, so this is all good stuff here. We are ready for testing both, RDP, HTTP, and SMB, the file share access on this server, right? So if you see here, I think it should just work fine if it helps me. And if I say http wis file 01 .wfis.prib, right? It's asking me for authentication because that's the Windows authentication here. So if I use my login credentials here, it should just work. And that's a plain IIS configuration. So very simple to do that. Now in order to configure the private access, we have to log on to the Entra portal here. So let's quickly log into the Entra portal. uh, Now I may not be able to show you the activation through this portal because I have already activated here. So you go down here in the global secure access, and when you come here first time, you will see getting started, and it will let you activate your tenant. So let me show you a screenshot of that. Give me a second. So you will see here, once you go to the global secure access, you will get it started, and you will have the activate option here. Once you activate, your tenant is ready for global secure access. Initially it may give you a trial, I think for 30 days. If you already past that, then you may need to buy the trial or evaluation licenses for Entra Suite, which is what I did. Once you have activated your tenant here, you will go and download the connector software, right? So you go to the connectors here, and it's very straightforward. I keep mentioning that a very simplified deployment. So you download the connector services on your app proxy services, which is what I already did. I'm already connected here with the default connector here. But before I go to the server and show you all the prerequisites here, you will see here that it is showing a default connector group as default, right? Which is what I didn't change it. But if you have to work in multiple regions, then you probably would create multiple connector groups, and you would have at least two app proxy connector in each of those connector group, right? So right now North America region, so supposedly your organization also works in EMEA, so you might have a configuration in the London area or Asia Pacific, however that is, that region you create, and depending on that you have the connector group, you would have your connectors there, right? A proxy connector. Now remember that this is where the scalability, and you don't have to do anything beyond that, right? You create your connector group for the region, you add your app proxy connector, ideally two because you need a high availability, and that's pretty much it. So simplifying again without worrying about load balancers and global DNS and all that is gone, right? Each connector group would have its sets of its own application and own tunnels. So you don't need to worry about people coming, users working in Singapore are somehow trying to connect to something here in US, right? So that's pretty much the scope of this connectors here. Let's get back to the server here and look at the Edge AZ proxy server. The one requirement that we mentioned, that it should be a TLS 1.2 enabled, right? By default, this server that I have, I think it's a 2019 server, the TLS 1.2 was not enabled, right? So if you see what operating system, 2019 data center, right? I was right. Now if that's the case, what you should do is, then these scripts are available on Microsoft site, you can download it. You have a where I am, which machine I am. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on AZ proxy right now. Oh, sorry, back there. So if I go to, these are the two scripts that you can download, enable TLS and TLS check, and you can run these scripts to see whether your server is ready for app proxy connector deployment, right? So if you see here, this is one application that could check whether you are TLS enabled or not. In my scenario, I already did that, right? So it's a check, and if I do that, it's all registry keys are very well created and populated. If that's not the case, you can open another file, and that is the enable one, right? So enable TLS. Once you do that, you can run the script. It would enable the TLS 1.2. You can double check it by going into the registry too, right? And one important thing, that if you enable TLS, you have to reboot this server. So that is a key point that you need to take away. And if you look into reg edit here, HKey local machine system, current control, set control, security provider, external protocols, here you see the value for protocol. This is required, right? That's all you need to do. After that, you're good to go ahead and install your downloaded soft MSI for as a ready connect. Pretty straightforward. The whole process of installing may take less than 2 minutes, right? So it's that easy to do that, and that's what I keep mentioning here. Going back, once you install it, it will show it active, which is what it is already showing it. During the installation, it will ask you for your Entra ID credentials, the global access, the global admin credentials that you would provide, and as soon as you provide, it is going to be connected here. Very straightforward. After the connector is installed, the next item that I generally prefer to do is to make sure that my DNS can be used, internal DNS can be used through private access. So what I do in that scenario is that I create the quick access application. So I already created here, but I will show you how simple it is. This is the application that I created. Again, important point here is that it is using a connector group. So if you have got multiple connector groups, you will have multiple quick access application, right? Very simple logical explanation. And the first thing that you would do here in the application segment, you will add IP addresses, which could be either choice that you want to make. IP address, fully qualified, CIDRs, or IP to IP. I use the CIDR here. I'm using the entire subnet here. And another important point to note here, that you do not want to publish port 53, which is being used by DNS. So you can, that's why I use 1 to 52 and left 53 and use 54 to the rest of the port. So that's good to go. Once you do that, you apply it, you will have to save it. The second thing that you need to do here in terms of application assignment is create your fully qualified domain name, publish that, which is again very easy, simple to understand. Keep saying simplified here, right? Very simple. Once you have done that, you come to the private DNS, add your DNS suffix, one single statement, and then enable private DNS. By doing these 3-4 activities, now you have allowed your private access, global secure access clients to be able to resolve your internal host name through your internal DNS server. How cool is that? I mean, that's so simple, right? Maybe 4-5 minutes task or the most. Now once you have done that, then you can start publishing your resources that you want your remote users to be accessible. So when we go to the enterprise applications here, I created 3 of them. Very simple to that. You can create a new application and then create your application. Since I have already created one, I'll show you this here. File server. And when you go to this network access properties, that's where you have the application assignment, right? Or application segment, not assignment, sorry about that. Application segment. So you can define IP addresses, fully qualified domain name. I did both of them. So IP address, initially I tested with IP address, but then I am publishing here 3389, which is RDP, file server, and the web server, right? We can test all 3 of them here. Now, we also did with the fully qualified domain here as well, right? Remember that you cannot have multiple application segment configured for the same set of IP addresses, right? That's important to understand. So this is, otherwise it's going to fail. So you have, because basically you are creating one tunnel through this application to your endpoints, right? So that's the reason that you cannot have multiple configurations overlapping IP addresses here. So this is straightforward. Right now when we talk about this, so we mentioned about that you can control access with granular access. The first thing that I mentioned, that who should be able to access this file server. So you can go to users and groups and add your required users and groups, right? I just tested it with all users. I tested with Abraham Garcia. In your scenario, it may be remote users for North America, or remote users for EMEA, whatever the case may be. But now you control, not every Tom and Harry can just go and access your file server, which is the control that you want, which is what I mentioned that is not possible in your regular VPN solution, right? So it's here, you control it. You control the way you want it to be controlled. First of all, who can access it? So we control it following the zero trust principle here, minimizing the least privilege access. Only the right people have access to this file server, right? That's one important point. Second point which we mentioned earlier was that it integrates with Microsoft identity ecosystem, right? So here you go, it has a conditional access. When you click a new policy, it automatically configure that application. So for that example, we already created it. If you click new policy here, I will not do that now, but you will see the target resource is already included here, right? The file server is already included, so you don't have to take this step, but you will do all of the rest of the stuff, which is what we did here for file servers PA. You would add the specific users again. So you will define which users you are applying to. In this scenario, I'm only using one user here, but you could have the entire set of users here. And then you can define your conditions, which was never possible. Oh, I'm sorry, which was never possible with your on-prem resources, right? So sorry about that. Now you can say what networks and conditions here. Risky users, risky sign-in, you have got insider risk, you have got device platform, you can configure which locations they are allowed to come. For an example, you don't want them to come from Russia, you can block it. You don't want them to come from anything outside US, you can block it, right? So this is where it automatically, and remember that this is automatically improving your security posture. Now when we go to the grants here, which is integral part of your conditional access, you can do the required multi-factor authentication. Again, this is important. And then you can also do other conditions here, right? So see here, required application protection, required password change, so sorry, and you can have the machine compliant too, required, right? So for example, required Microsoft Entra hybrid joint device, which is the actually a requirement here, right? And then you can say required device mark to be compliant. If the Intune says nah, this device is not up to date, it's not able to connect it. So those secure granular controls are at your fingertips, as I mentioned earlier. It's seeing is believing. You can also set the sign-in frequency here, which is controlling your session ticket here. Sign-in frequency you can configure every time. You can have multiple choices here as well, right? You can have your global policy applied here too. So that gives you the required control here when you configure these applications, right? So we have got file server configured here. Now if you go back to the enterprise applications back again, I also have published DC Kerberos for single sign-on here. I did AZ proxy too, just for the sake, but if you say here, what is the application segment allowed here, right? If you see here, this is what I would allow. I would give you a document, an article, Microsoft article that gives you all the required ports, but this is the ports, these are the ports that you're required to publish for DC Kerberos SSO. Remember that there is a special condition here. This Kerberos SSO has got different requirement for different types of authentication that you have configured on your Entra Connect. So for an example, if you are using a managed domain, that means you are using a password hash synchronization PHS with a seamless single sign-on, then you only have to do this activity. But if you are using federation kind of services, ADFS or something else on federation, then you have to do some additional tasks. My scenario is very simple. I have password hash synchronization with seamless single sign-on, so I don't have to do anything beyond publishing these ports here. And that's how the DC Kerberos SSO is going to start working, and which we're going to test it, right? So this is enterprise application. Do you think it's hard? I think it's pretty straightforward. Next important thing here is that you do the traffic, enable the traffic forwarding here. You go to traffic forwarding and you activate your private access profile. Just this button here. How many minutes it takes to do all this thing, right? And the last part is that you need to download the client and install it onto your endpoint. As I mentioned, Windows 10 and 11, you have the client right here. These are the requirements. Android, I already discussed with you what are the requirements here. And iOS and Mac, I told you that these are in the preview mode. They are not GA yet, but if you want to try, go ahead and try. And these are the requirements. That proves the point that Microsoft is working really hard to add additional features and services to make it really good product for every type of user and every type of devices, which was our initial discussion here, right? That's pretty much it. So I have downloaded the client already on a Azure VM here, which is what I can show you quickly here. This VM is obviously not connected to the corporate network. This is sitting outside, completely emulating your internet world. Oops, I got very few out. This is my Windows 11 machine up and running, right? All good. Now, the only thing that I need to do here is go and connect to this VM, and that's the VM I should be connecting to. So I'm connecting to my Azure VM, which is not connected to the corporate network. And the first thing that I want to show you here, I'm going to close all this stuff. So one thing that automatically happens from the end user experience perspective, that nobody has to do anything. The tool is the GSA client is already installed and up and running. Come on. So you see here, the user has to do nothing. The global secure access is already connected here, right? It may ask you for MFA. If you see, this global secure access client is asking for credentials now for MFA. I hope it will kick in here. And it took the because of seamless single sign-on, it took the password. It is asking only for my multi-factor authentication, which I want to authenticate now. And here we go. Once you do it first time, that's a security control that we needed anyway, but now it's a secure session, right? We can also go to advanced diagnostic here before we start doing anything. So you see here, this is the advanced diagnostic here. It gives you the details of who the user is, what the device is, what the tenant is, what the forwarding profile we are using here, what time it is checked. You can do the health check on this agent, which is pretty straightforward. Right, all good. IP4 is actually preferred. This is slightly misnomerous when you see the red flag here. I was worried, but then I researched it and it's all good. Right, now forwarding profiles. This is the forwarding profile. You can here test is your policies that you created. So for an example, if I'm going to test 192.168, oops, 168.86.120, which is, by the way, my file server, and the port that I'm going to test here, whether it's going through the tunnel or not, is 80, and run the test. It tells me good, otherwise it will say fail or bypass here if it's not working, right? Pretty straightforward. Now we can also do the traffic inspection here, how the traffic is working. We can start collecting the data and do something here to see whether the traffic shows up going to the private access, right? So let's do this first SMB test, which is what we publish, which is the file share test, right? If we go OK here, it's going 445, and guess what? Private access is working with SMB protocol with flawlessly, right? Absolutely seeing is believing, and that's what I said. The user experience is awesome, right? You just go here, you see this is already working connected here. Now the next thing that we need to try is LDAP, right? Oh, sorry, the RDP. So we just do the RDP here, and this is the DNS part working, right? So before I go there, I want to show you that this DNS is registered, and ds reg cmd / status. So that's where the prerequisites are required, that this machine is joined to Entra ID or Azure Active Directory. So this is where it meets the requirement. It is joined to Azure Active Directory, and it is also domain joined. That means it is a hybrid joined device, right? Second thing that what we can test here is whether our quick access application is working or not. So let's just quickly do that. And see whether how does it work. See here, and that's not the actual IP address, as you know, of this machine, right? This is inetted IP address. This is how it works, right? So I showed you that quick access application is working, resolving the DNS fine, and now I can go and try to do the RTP here to this server. So we already tested the file share. We are going to test now the RDP, right? So that RDP connection disconnected. We are just connected back here to this system. So that proves the point, right? So we tested RDP, we tested the file server, we tested the quick access. Now the next item that we need to test is the port 80 with Kerberos SSO. So if I open the URL here, it should just work fine. And that proves that how easy, simple deployment is private access is. Either I can go with the IP, because we have already published that in application segment, or we can go with the DNS name here as well. Here you go, and it is working, right? It's working, right? I proved all the three things here, right? I could show you on-prem as well, but the point here is that this is working transparently. It is a simplistic deployment, and user experience is awesome. Nothing to be done, accessing the resources with the security controls in the background, right? That's the beauty here. And so let's see one more thing here that I did it. On this Windows 11 machine, I installed the RSET tool. That means it should be able to connect to the Active Directory. This user is a domain admin. Now we need to see how does that piece work, right? So if I just go and open the Active Directory users and computers, very simplistic test, it should just see all these protocols now. 389, 135. This is all Kerberos, right? This is all happening, including the dynamic ports here, because now we are connecting to the domain controller, and we have Active Directory users and computers snap-in fully available to us, because this user is an administrator we can actually create a user here if we like and test the whole thing, right? So you have all these access because the Kerberos SSO is now working, right? I can create new user, blah blah blah. So I'm not going to do all this, but I just wanted to show you, because of this Kerberos SSO that we have published, you are able to see and hit all these ports on your domain controller, right? Now if you go back here on the portal and we go back to the enterprise applications, and let's say we are working on file servers here, and you can see the sign-in logs here, which many of you are familiar with it, but if you're not, you will see the details here that you conditional access is met and blah blah blah, right? Success here, ZTNA, Abraham Garcia, multi-factor authentication. If you go here, MFA completed in Azure AD, right? Conditional access policy, the out of these three policy, this is the one that is get applied, which is what is for this particular application, right? Authentication details, multi-factor authentication notification is already, because it has the token already on the machine, you don't need to worry about it. All the details are here, right? So this is what I was talking about. Everything is so simple here in terms of operations, management, troubleshooting, and user experience. And I think I proved the point that I started with my presentation, that how effective this solution is in terms of allowing network access with identity centric approach, right? Scalable geolocations wherever and however you want to configure, whatever applications you want to allow access to, all that is possible within this control. And you have got lot many security controls that you never had on your on-prem devices. I think I conclude here, and I would request for your feedback and see if it makes sense or if you need anything else that we need to be seen. Thank you so very much for your most valuable time. Appreciate a lot. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you find it informative, and hope it helps you make decisions in the right direction. Thank you so very much. Appreciate it.